Good morning, I'm Dominic Sposeto. I'm the association's lobbyist at the state legislature, and today I'm going to give you a brief overview of the 2015 legislative session and some of the issues that the association followed during that session. The 2014 elections gave us what we commonly refer to as divided government. And divided government could have resulted in the session from hell, as it has in the past, but there was one particular thing that kept that from happening this time around, and that was a nearly $2 billion budget surplus in the state coffers. So with that much money around, the discussion centered on a couple of key issues. First was transportation. Both Republicans, Democrats in the Senate, and the governor had all agreed that transportation would be a key issue for the 2015 legislative session. But almost immediately the battle lines began to be drawn. The governor and the Senate Democrats wanted to propose a transportation bill with a dedicated funding source funded through an increase in the gasoline tax. With low gas prices and the need to create a consistent funding source, they believe the gasoline tax would be the way to go. Obviously, the Republicans opposed that as a tax increase, and they chose to instead take this money from the surplus to fund various transportation projects. Now again, that would only be a one-time funding source, so additional projects after that date would have to come back to the legislature for funding. So that was a very controversial proposal, and they debated that for a very long time. They also decided to try and deal with state taxes. The Democrats primarily wanted to continue the taxes as they were, fund rainy day funds, and make sure that we had money if we went through another recession again. And they did want to do some small reforms in property taxes to help individual taxpayers with their property taxes. The Republicans chose to reduce commercial property and income taxes, and then also to return a good portion of the money to individual taxpayers through credits and deductions. Unfortunately, the legislature couldn't reach agreement on either of those proposals, transportation or tax bills, so none of those were passed during the legislative session. Instead, basically, the legislature punted. They left about $865 million in the surplus to deal with in the 2016 legislative session, which should be very fun before an election year. Then the legislature turned to the task that they actually had to do, and that was to pass a state budget, which I'm pleased to report they did after a very short special session. The issues related to the budget were just basically money. The governor wanted to go to a $43.5 billion biennial budget. The Republicans wanted to do something much smaller, around $41 billion. Obviously, they fought about that, and the compromise turned out to be a total of $42.6 billion when you add in the various funding gimmicks that were included in part of the budget. That represents an 8.3% growth rate in our state income, our state expenditures. And that's about one of the fifth or sixth lowest since 1960. So if you're a Democrat, you can say you funded a lot of new projects. If you're a Republican, you can say that you held down state spending. So consequently, that was viewed as the compromise. When we look at this legislative session, it'll probably be recognized for what didn't happen and what the legislature failed to do, more so than what they did do. Another measure of that is the amount of laws that were passed. There were 80 laws passed in the regular session, 6 in the special session, for a total of 86. That is the lowest total of laws passed in a odd-numbered year in the nearly 3 decades that I've been a lobbyist. So it was a very, I guess you could call it a do-nothing or not much legislative session. However, there were some very interesting insurance issues that were enacted, and I'll go through those very briefly. Again, they're all further detailed in my report, Capital News, which you can find on the website, along with citations for the bills if you'd like to find copies of that. First thing I want to mention is the so-called Uber bill. That became a very controversial issue early on until the Uber people and the insurance industry reached some sort of a national consensus on how to deal with their insurance issues. The laws will establish insurance requirements for both the transportation network companies and their drivers who will be using their own personal auto. It's It's very clear for our purposes. The law specifically states that coverage does not exist for drivers under their private passenger auto policy when they are engaged in network transportation activities. It's interesting, the law, however, does not preclude an insurer from providing that type of coverage through additional coverages or policy riders. So look for that as a rider or an existing or a new coverage that may be adopted by the industry, and I know there are a couple of carriers, primarily direct riders, that are talking about doing this. Another bill was Minnesota Right to Advice. This is legislation that was sponsored by two insurance agents, Senator Vicki Jensen and Representative Greg Davids, both licensed producers, and it basically allows consumers to select the agent of their choice. It puts in statute, a practice that we've had for a very long time in the industry, the agent of record letter and agent of record agreements, whereby a policyholder can select their insurance agent. It requires the state health plans to recognize a valid AOR and appropriate the award the appropriate compensation to the agent. They must do so within 30 days of receipt of a valid AOR. This legislation grew out of the problems that we were having with MIIAB, but keep in mind the AOR statute applies to all lines of insurance, not just health insurance. A specific provision to health insurance would allow policyholders who purchased health insurance through MIIAB, the state's health insurance exchange, to retroactively appoint an insurance agent of their choice. And they can do that back to January 1st, 2015. And once the appointment is made, the carriers will recognize that appointment. The association also got involved in a issue related to self-storage rental insurance. The self-storage industry wanted to pass legislation to allow them to mandate insurance coverage for people who store their personal property in their storage facilities. Not a major issue for us, but we wanted to make sure that homeowners and renters knew that they may have coverage under their existing policy. So we added language to their bill, which is disclosure language, that basically states they have to disclose in large 12-point type. Your renter's or homeowner's policy may provide the insurance you need. Check with your insurance agent to determine if your personal property stored at a location other than your home or business is covered. That law took effect immediately. We also passed legislation relating to electronic proof of insurance. This is a new law that allows proof of insurance to be maintained electronically upon a device instead of with your traditional insurance card or policy deck sheet. The use of such a device, however, does not constitute consent for law enforcement to look at everything on your phone. So I think that was a very controversial issue. Clearly the proof of insurance provision was not, it was just the access to further information, and that did pass. The Insurance Federation of Minnesota has been engaged for a while in an effort to address auto insurance fraud. This year they were able to gain two significant pieces of legislation. One would allow the Commerce Department to assess penalties, administrative penalties, against a healthcare provider who is found to be committing fraud. The fines can go up to $20,000 per incident. This is important because previously the activities and regulation of healthcare providers engaged in this type of fraud was the purview of the healthcare licensing boards. And if you know anything about healthcare licensing boards, they're generally run by the professions that they regulate. This gives the Commerce Department the ability to go after these people. The Commerce Department will be able to bar these healthcare providers from accepting reimbursement from auto insurers for up to 5 years, and that's another significant change. Lastly, I want to talk a bit about long-term care insurance. Legislation was sponsored by NAIFA and the long-term care insurance industry to reduce the inflation protections that's required under our long-term care partnership products. These are products that are sold in Minnesota as partnership products that protect a person's assets after they are admitted into a nursing home and qualify for medical assistance, or Medicaid as we call it. These policies have been sold since, I believe, 2006 when we enacted the legislation. The required inflation protection was 3%. That's being reduced to 1%. which makes it more consistent with the inflationary growth in the United States, and also will make these policies more affordable with that lower inflation protection. One provision is that policies that were written prior to the law all the way up back to 2006 that meet all the requirements of a partnership status shall now be allowed to qualify for partnership status upon the request of the insured. The insured must make a written inquiry to their insurance company to determine whether it meets policy status, and the company must respond within 30 days. I'm not sure how many of those policies that were sold between now and back to 2006 will qualify, but just be aware that you can submit a request for partnership status if they meet the requirements. So that was it for the legislative session. I want to refer you to my Capital News report. It has more detail on these specific pieces of legislation. It also has citations where you can find them at the legislature's website, which we have a link to on our homepage. So thank you very much. I enjoyed very much representing you at the state capitol and look forward to doing it again next year. Thank you.
We would like to thank our 2015 Power and Partners for their continued support of Minnesota independent insurance agents and brokers. Starting with our Diamond Level partners. Foremost Insurance Group, you can count on us. Western National Insurance, the relationship company. Secura Insurance Companies, write your own success story. Auto Owners Insurance, the no problem people. Arlington Row Insurance, serving independent agents since 1964. EMC Insurance, count on EMC. AAA Insurance, expect something more. Progressive Insurance, think easier, think progressive. Austin Mutual Insurance Company, rebuilding lives and restoring dreams. North Star Mutual Insurance, a personable company keeping you on course. West Bend Mutual Insurance, the silver lining company. Secondly, our platinum level partners, Premco, Nationwide, Grinnell Mutual, Burns & Wilcox, Integrity Insurance, Swiss Re, Risk Administration Services, and SFM the Work Comp Experts. Last but not least, our gold and silver level partners,